The crystal tumbler shattered against my marble floor the moment I saw my nephew collapse. Marcus had been reaching for the bourbon I just poured him when his legs gave out. Now he was convulsing on my Persian rug, white foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. And all I could think was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to him. If you're reading this, you should know I didn't survive 73 years and build a Fortune 500 company by being naive. When someone tries to poison you in your own study, you notice, especially when that someone has been circling your assets like a vulture ever since your doctor mentioned that heart murmur. 2 hours earlier, my penthouse had been filled with the sounds of celebration. I'd just announced my retirement from Blackwood Industries, the shipping empire I'd built from a single cargo vessel after my father's death 40 years ago. The company sale would net me $47 million, not counting my other investments. Uncle Warren, my grandnephew Trevor had insisted, you deserve a proper send-off. Those earnest blue eyes of his had worked their usual magic. Let Diane handle all the arrangements. You just sit back and enjoy being honored. I should have known something was wrong when Diane volunteered to play hostess. The woman who usually needed 3 assistants to order lunch was suddenly coordinating catering, guest lists, and bar service like she'd been born to it. She spent the entire week before the party fussing over details, polishing silver, and arranging flowers with the dedication of someone whose life depended on getting everything perfect. Which, as it turned out, it probably did. The party was elegant, I'll give her that. About 50 people from the maritime industry, old friends, distant relatives, and business associates. Diane had even hired professional servers. Nothing but the best for Uncle Warren, she'd gushed, squeezing my arm with those French manicured nails that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I was discussing merger trends with my former CFO when I saw it happen. Diane standing near the bar, looking around nervously before pulling a small vial from her Hermes clutch. My blood turned to ice as I watched her empty the clear contents into a specific glass. My usual tumbler, the Waterford Crystal one, with the small chip on the base that I always used for bourbon. A reasonable person might have shouted, might have called security, might have confronted her immediately. But I've learned that sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let them think they've cornered their prey. So I smiled, nodded at whatever my CFO was saying about shipping rates, and kept watching. Diane picked up my poisoned bourbon and began walking toward me, her face a perfect mask of familial devotion. Uncle Warren, you look tired, she said, offering me the glass. Here, your favorite bourbon. You've more than earned it tonight. I took the glass, thanked her warmly, and waited. About 15 minutes later, when she was busy showing off her new tennis bracelet to the other wives, I quietly switched glasses with Marcus, Trevor's younger brother, who was standing nearby, looking rather morose without a drink. Marcus had always been the overlooked sibling, perpetually bitter about living in Trevor's shadow. Poor bastard. He grabbed the nearest glass without thinking, the one I just placed next to his elbow. Within 10 minutes, he was commenting on the bourbon's unusual aftertaste and asking if I'd gotten it from a new distillery. The rest happened quickly. I knelt beside Marcus while Diane screamed for someone to call 911. Her performance of shock devastation was almost convincing. Almost. The problem with being a would-be murderer is that genuine panic and fake panic sound very different when you know what to listen for. What happened? Trevor demanded, pushing through the crowd that had gathered. His face was pale, but I caught something else in his expression. A quick glance toward Diane that lasted just a fraction too long. I don't know, Diane sobbed, gripping my sleeve. He just collapsed. 1 minute he was fine, the next... She gestured helplessly at Marcus, who was now unconscious but still breathing, thank God. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they worked on Marcus, preparing him for transport, I found myself studying Trevor's face. 42 years of watching him grow up had taught me to read his moods like weather patterns. Right now, he looked like a man watching his carefully orchestrated plans crumble in real time. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "Cedar-Sinai. Are you family?" "Close friend," I said, glancing meaningfully at Diane, who was too busy hyperventilating to notice. "I'll follow in my car." Trevor stepped forward quickly. "Uncle Warren, you don't need to do that. We'll handle everything. You should stay here, rest after all this excitement." How thoughtful. Keep the target at home while they figured out what went wrong with their little scheme. "Nonsense," I said firmly. "Marcus is practically family. I'm coming." I grabbed my keys before anyone could argue. At the hospital, I made sure to stay close enough to overhear the medical staff's conversations. Marcus's condition was listed as acute poisoning, cause unknown. The attending physician mentioned something about plant alkaloids to a nurse, specific enough to make me think someone had done their homework on untraceable toxins. Diane paced the waiting room, her Louboutin heels clicking against the linoleum like a metronome counting down her anxiety. Trevor sat rigidly in a plastic chair, his phone buzzing constantly with texts he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is just terrible," Diane said for the 6th time. "Poor Marcus. I can't understand how this happened." I patted her shoulder sympathetically. "These things are often mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Then I added, almost casually, "You know, it's lucky he didn't drink much of that bourbon. He only had a few sips before he collapsed." Diane's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "Bourbon? You think the bourbon caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said with a dismissive wave. "Just an old man's mind looking for patterns where there aren't any." But Diane's face had gone a shade paler, and her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee. Trevor was watching our conversation with the intensity of a hawk studying field mice. 4 hours later, a doctor emerged to tell us Marcus was stable, but would need to stay for observation. The tests were inconclusive, he said, but whatever he'd ingested was slowly working its way out of his system. "Can we see him?" Diane asked. "Family only, and he's sedated. Best to come back tomorrow." As we left the hospital, Trevor walked me to my car. "Uncle Warren, maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate, especially since Marcus's little medical emergency had probably left them wondering if I suspected anything. The answer was yes, absolutely I did. But they didn't need to know that yet. "That's sweet of you, Trevor, but I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember?" I kissed his cheek and got into my car, watching in my rearview mirror as he and Diane had what looked like an urgent whispered conversation in the parking lot. Back home, I poured myself a real glass of bourbon, from a fresh bottle, naturally, and settled into my study. Time to figure out exactly what my loving family had planned for me, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. I spent the night doing something I'd become quite good at in 40 years of business: research. Not the kind you do with computers and databases, the kind you do with a clear memory and a suspicious mind. Marcus's poisoning wasn't random, and it certainly wasn't an accident. Someone had planned to kill me at my own retirement party, probably hoping to make it look like a heart attack or stroke. At 73, with a documented heart condition, those things happen. No one questions when a successful businessman's ticker finally gives out. But why? That was the $47 million question, wasn't it? I made coffee at 5 a.m. and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything I knew about Trevor and Diane's financial situation. It wasn't encouraging. Trevor's tech startup had been hemorrhaging money since the last market correction. Diane's interior design business was more expense account than actual profit. They lived in a $3 million house in Beverly Hills that they could barely afford, drove matching Maseratis that weren't paid for, and maintained a lifestyle that could fund a small nation's defense budget. I'd helped them, of course. What great uncle wouldn't? A few $100,000 here and there when Trevor mentioned cash flow problems. The down payment on the house when Diane cried about wanting to raise their children in the right neighborhood. Private school tuition for the twins when they insisted public schools weren't adequate. Looking at my financial records, I'd given them nearly $1 million over the past 7 years. Gifts, I'd called them. Investments in their happiness. Never loans. That would have been tacky. But now, I was wondering if they'd seen those gifts differently. Less like avuncular generosity, and more like advance payments on an inheritance they couldn't wait to collect. The phone rang at 8 o'clock. Diane, calling to check on me. Warren, I couldn't sleep all night thinking about you, she said, her voice heavy with concern. After what happened to Marcus, I just worry that maybe there was something wrong with the food or drinks. You didn't feel ill at all, did you? How thoughtful of her to check whether her poison had found its intended target. Not at all, dear. I feel fine. How's Marcus this morning? The doctors say he should be able to go home today. They think maybe he took something that interacted badly with his allergy medication. You know how careless he can be. Marcus Peterson was many things, but careless with medication wasn't one of them. The man managed his allergies like a military operation, complete with EpiPens and medical alert bracelets. That's such a relief, I said. I was worried it might have been something from the party. That would have been terrible. Oh no, definitely not, Diane said quickly. The doctors were very clear it wasn't food poisoning or anything like that. Just one of those freak medical things. Interesting how quickly she wanted to shut down any investigation into what happened in my apartment. Almost as if she was worried someone might test the remaining bourbon. After hanging up, I walked to my bar and looked at the bottle Diane had opened for the party, still 3/4 full, sitting innocently on the silver tray. I wondered what would happen if I had it tested at a lab. Not that I needed proof for myself. I knew what I'd seen. But evidence might be useful later. My doorbell rang at 10 o'clock. Trevor stood in my hallway, holding a bag from my favorite deli, looking every inch the concerned nephew. Thought you might want some breakfast, he said, kissing my cheek. You probably didn't eat much yesterday after everything that happened. I let him in and made fresh coffee while he arranged the bagels and lox on a plate. Watching him move around my kitchen, opening drawers he'd known since childhood, reaching for napkins without asking where they were kept, I felt a strange sadness. This was still my brother's grandson, the boy who used to spend summers with me learning about ships and commerce. When had that curious child turned into a man who stood by while his wife tried to murder his great-uncle? How are you holding up, Uncle Warren? He asked, settling across from me at the breakfast table. Oh, you know me. Takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. The thing is, Uncle Warren, Trevor continued, picking at a poppy seed bagel, Diane and I have been talking about your situation. My situation? You're 73 years old, living alone in this huge place, managing all that money from the sale? He gestured vaguely. It just seems like a lot for one person to handle. There it was, the setup for whatever they had planned next. I appreciate your concern, Trevor, but I've been managing quite well so far. Trevor leaned forward, his expression earnest. Have you, though? I mean, yesterday's incident with Marcus, what if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours? The audacity was breathtaking. He was using their failed murder attempt as an argument for why I needed their protection. Trevor, Marcus collapsed at a party with 50 witnesses and paramedics arrived in minutes. I'd hardly call that a cautionary tale about living alone. That's not what I meant. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was about to ask for something he knew I'd refuse. Look, Diane and I have been doing some research. There are some really nice communities for active seniors, places where you'd have people around, activities, medical staff on site. Ah, the nursing home pitch. How convenient that they'd already been researching options for me. How thoughtful, I said. I suppose you have somewhere specific in mind. Actually, yes. He pulled out his phone and showed me a glossy website. Golden Sunset Estates. It's only 30 minutes from our house, so we could visit all the time. They have a marina, a country club, cultural activities. It's more like a resort than a retirement community. I studied the pictures of smiling elderly people, playing tennis, and dining in elegant restaurants. Everyone looked so peaceful and content. Probably because they were heavily medicated. The only thing is, Trevor continued, there's usually a waiting list. But if someone wanted to move in quickly, they'd need to pay the full entrance fee up front. It's significant, about $800,000, but it covers everything. Housing, meals, medical care for life. $800,000. That would make a nice dent in my liquid assets, wouldn't it? And once I was safely tucked away in Golden Sunset Estates, who would have power of attorney over the remaining $46 million? Who would be making decisions about my care and my money? It sounds lovely, I said, but you know, I'm quite happy here. This place holds so many memories of your grandfather. Uncle Warren, Grandpa's been gone 20 years. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter? The gentle concern in his voice made my heart ache. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen last night, I might have actually considered his suggestion. My grandnephew worried about his aging great-uncle, wanting to make sure he was safe and cared for. It would have been touching. Instead, it was terrifying. I'll think about it, I said finally. It's a big decision. Trevor's relief was visible. Of course, take all the time you need. Maybe we could drive out there next week just to look around. Maybe. I stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes. You know, I should call Marcus today. Make sure he's feeling better. Actually, Uncle Warren, the doctor said Marcus needs to rest for a few days. Visitors might be too stimulating while he recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence was out of his system and his memories became fuzzy. After Trevor left, I sat in my study and thought about timing. They'd waited until after I sold the company to make their move. Smart. If I died 6 months ago, my $47 million would have gone to various charities and family members according to my will. But now, with all that liquid cash, they could make a case that I needed immediate protection from predatory financial advisors and investment scammers. The phone rang. My attorney, Harrison Webb, returning a call I'd made earlier. Warren, good to hear from you. How was the retirement party? Eventful, I said. Harrison, I need to see you today. Can you make time? Is everything all right? I looked out my study window at the city skyline, the view I'd enjoyed for 15 years. Soon, if Trevor and Diane had their way, I'd be looking at manicured gardens and other people's grandchildren visiting on Sundays. I'm not sure, I said, but I think I'm about to find out. Harrison Webb had been my attorney for 25 years, which meant he'd seen me through my father's death, the building of my business, and every major decision since. A sharp, practical man who kept his emotions carefully controlled. Harrison was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted when you suspected your family was trying to kill you. His office occupied half the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, all mahogany and marble, designed to inspire confidence in wealthy clients. I'd always felt secure here, surrounded by law books and the subtle scent of old money. Tell me everything, Harrison said, after his assistant brought us coffee and closed the door. I told him every detail from the party, Marcus's collapse, Trevor's visit this morning. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his yellow legal pad. You're certain about what you saw? He asked when I finished. As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair. Harrison leaned back, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against his lips. The problem is proving intent. Diane could claim she was adding something harmless to the bourbon, a flavor enhancer, a supplement, something personal. Without testing the remaining liquor, we have no evidence of attempted murder. Then let's test it. If we find poison, we have proof she attempted to kill someone. But we still can't prove she intended to kill you specifically. She could claim she was targeting Marcus for insurance money, or that it was meant for someone else entirely. I hadn't considered that angle. So even with proof of poisoning, they could escape a murder charge. Attempted murder, yes, but Warren, there's something else we need to discuss. Harrison's expression grew serious. If they're willing to kill you for your money, they might try other approaches first. Legal challenges to your competency, for instance. On what grounds? Your age? Living alone? The stress of selling your business? If they can establish a pattern of declining judgment or mental capacity, they could petition for guardianship. Once they control your person, they control your assets. The nursing home suggestion suddenly made more sense. Get me isolated, surrounded by medical professionals who might be willing to document signs of confusion or dementia, especially if those professionals were being compensated for their observations. What do I need to do? Harrison opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. First, we document your current mental state. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist, someone who specializes in competency assessments for elderly clients. Get that on record immediately. And then we get creative with your estate planning. Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. If Trevor and Diane want to play games with your money, let's make sure they're playing by your rules. We spent the next 3 hours going over options, trust structures that would make it difficult for anyone to challenge my decisions, medical directives that specified exactly who could and couldn't make healthcare decisions on my behalf, financial arrangements that would trigger automatic audits if anyone attempted to access my accounts without proper authorization. There's one more thing, Harrison said as I prepared to leave. Given what you've told me about last night, I think you should consider your personal safety. If they tried once, they'll try again, probably more carefully next time. I thought about Trevor's suggestion that I stay with them after Marcus's collapse. How convenient that would have been. A grieving old man, distraught over his grandnephew's sudden illness, perhaps taking a sedative to help him sleep. So easy for an elderly person to accidentally take too many pills. What do you recommend? Security upgrades for starters, motion sensors, cameras, a panic button system. I can recommend a company that specializes in protection for high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals. That's what I was now, apparently. Rich enough to kill for. Driving home, I found myself checking every car in my rearview mirror, wondering if I was being followed. Paranoia, probably. But as my father used to say, you're not paranoid if they're really after you. My phone rang as I pulled into my building's parking garage. Diane, her voice bright with artificial cheer. Warren, I wanted to let you know Marcus is home from a hospital. He's feeling much better, though he doesn't remember much about last night. The doctor said that's normal with this kind of incident. How perfectly convenient. I'm so glad he's all right. I'd love to visit him tomorrow. Oh, he's really not up for visitors yet. Maybe in a few days when he's stronger. I'll let you know. Of course, dear. Just tell him I'm thinking of him. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a long moment, looking at the building I'd called home for 15 years. My father and I had looked at this penthouse when I was 45, full of dreams about entertaining clients and hosting family gatherings. The price had been a stretch then, but we'd been optimistic, certain that success was just around the corner. Now it felt like a fortress under siege, but I'd been in business long enough to know that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Time to show my family what a sharp old businessman was really capable of. The security company arrived at 7 a.m. the next morning. 4 technicians in unmarked vans who spent the day installing cameras, motion detectors, and a panic button system that could summon private security in under 2 minutes. I told my doorman I'd been having problems with package theft. A believable enough story in any wealthy neighborhood. By afternoon, my penthouse was better protected than most banks. But the real security came from the envelope Harrison's courier delivered at 3 o'clock. My updated will, trust documents, and medical directives, all properly witnessed and notarized. If Trevor and Diane wanted my money, they'd have to wait for it, and they'd get significantly less than they expected. The new will cut Trevor's inheritance from the bulk of my estate to a modest trust fund that would pay him $75,000 a year for life. Enough to live comfortably, but not enough to fund their current lifestyle. As for Diane, she got nothing, not a penny. I'd never particularly liked the woman, but I'd tolerated her for Trevor's sake. Attempted murder, however, was where I drew the line. I was reading through the documents one final time when my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I can see Trevor and Diane standing in my hallway, both looking somewhat grim. "Uncle Warren, we need to talk," Trevor said when I opened the door. "Of course, come in." They settled in my living room. Diane perched on the edge of the sofa like she might need to run at any moment. Trevor looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the new security camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked. "Package theft," I said smoothly. "You can't be too careful these days." Diane cleared her throat. "Warren, we've been thinking about what happened the other night with Marcus's accident." "Yes?" "Well, it's just that we feel terrible about having the party here. If something we brought caused him to get sick..." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I watched this performance with professional appreciation. Diane had clearly been practicing. "I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, dear." "But what if it was?" Trevor leaned forward. "What if there was something wrong with the bourbon or the food? Uncle Warren, I'd never forgive myself if we'd accidentally put you in danger." Here it came, the setup for whatever they'd planned next. "The point is," Diane said, "we think it might be better if we took care of you for a while, just until we're sure you're safe." "Took care of me how?" "Well, you can stay with us," Trevor said, "just temporarily, until we figure out what happened the other night." I let the silence stretch, watching their faces. Trevor looked genuinely worried. He'd always been good at convincing himself his motivations were pure. Diane looked like a woman whose credit cards were maxed out. "That's very thoughtful," I said finally. "But I'm perfectly safe here." "Are you, though?" Diane's voice took on an edge. "You're 73 years old, Warren, living alone. What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The same argument Trevor had made yesterday. They were working from a script. "What if you have a fall?" Trevor added, "or another heart episode? Uncle Warren, at your age, anything could happen. At my age, as if 73 meant I was already dead and just hadn't noticed yet." "You know," I said thoughtfully, "you're absolutely right. Anything could happen in my age. That's exactly why I spent the day updating my will." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "Your will?" Diane's voice was carefully neutral. "Oh yes, it's amazing how a brush with mortality, even someone else's, makes you think about these things. I realized my old will was terribly out of date." Trevor's face had gone pale. "What kind of updates?" I smiled at him, the same smile I'd used when he was 12, and I caught him lying about breaking my ship in a bottle. "Oh, just some minor adjustments to reflect my current priorities. You know how these things go." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to figure out how badly their plans had just been disrupted. "Well," Diane said finally, her voice tight, "I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best." "I think so too, dear." They left shortly after, promising to check on me soon. I watched from my security monitor as they sat in their car in the parking garage for 15 minutes, having what looked like a very intense conversation. Then, Diane made a phone call, gesturing angrily while Trevor kept trying to take the phone from her. When they finally drove away, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite chair. Tomorrow, I would implement phase 2 of my plan. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the first peaceful evening I'd had in days. After all, There's something deeply satisfying about watching your enemies realize they've underestimated you. The next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. Marcus Peterson stood at my door looking pale but determined, clutching a small overnight bag like a lifeline. "Uncle Warren, I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. "It's about the other night." I invited him in and made tea, studying his face for lingering signs of the poisoning. He looked tired but alert, certainly more coherent than Diane would have liked me to believe. "Diane told me I had some kind of reaction to my allergy medication," Marcus said, settling into my living room chair. "But Uncle Warren, I don't take allergy medication. Haven't for years since I got those shots." "Interesting. What do you remember about the party?" "Everything, until I started feeling dizzy. I remember the bourbon tasting strange, bitter, almost medicinal. And I remember seeing Diane near the bar earlier, doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? Like a dropper bottle, the kind you'd use for essential oils or..." He paused, his hands shaking slightly as he set down his teacup. "Uncle Warren, I think Diane tried to poison you." "Why would you think that?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Because she's been talking about your money for months. How unfair it is that you have so much while they struggle. How much easier their lives would be if something happened to you." The pieces were falling into place. "Has she said anything specific?" "Last month, she asked me if I thought you'd updated your will recently. She seemed very concerned about Trevor's inheritance, worried that you might leave everything to charity." Marcus met my eyes. "Uncle Warren, I think they've been planning this for a while. I made a decision. Marcus deserved to know what his brother and sister-in-law had tried to do, and I needed an ally who'd witness their behavior firsthand." "Marcus, I saw Diane put something in my bourbon glass. I switched our drinks deliberately." The color drained from his face. "She tried to kill you, and I almost died instead." "Yes." We sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had happened. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked finally. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," I said. "Just not the way they expect to get it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means your brother and his wife are about to learn that some games have higher stakes than they realized." After Marcus left, I made a phone call to an old business contact. Catherine Morris ran a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate espionage and financial fraud. We'd worked together several times over the years when I needed background checks on potential business partners. "Warren Blackwood." Catherine's voice was warm through the phone. "I heard about your retirement. Congratulations." "Thank you, Catherine. I need a favor. A personal one." "What kind of favor?" "I need to know everything about my grandnephew's finances. Bank accounts, credit cards, loans, investments, everything." There was a pause. "Warren, are you sure? Sometimes family information can be uncomfortable." "I'm sure. Give me 48 hours. While Catherine worked her magic, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I called Trevor and asked him to meet me for lunch at our old restaurant, the place we'd celebrated his graduation from Wharton, his wedding, his twins' births. He arrived looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. "How are you feeling, Uncle Warren? You sounded concerned when you called." "I've been thinking about what you and Diane said, about my safety, about planning for the future." His face brightened. "And? I think you're right. I think it's time to make some changes." Trevor leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been looking into Golden Sunset Estates, the place you mentioned. I called them this morning." "That's wonderful, Uncle Warren. I think you'll really love it there. They do have an opening, but it needs to be filled quickly. Someone else is interested in the same unit." "How quickly?" "Next week. I'd need to pay the entrance fee by Friday to secure it." Trevor's excitement was palpable. "That's not a problem, is it? You have the money from the sale." "Of course I do. It's just, well, it's a big step. I thought maybe you and Diane could help me with the paperwork. Make sure I'm making the right decision. Absolutely. We'd be happy to help. ... I smiled at my grandnephew, memorizing his face. In a few days, that eager expression would change to something very different. There's just one thing, I added casually. The facility requires all residents to have a power of attorney on file, someone to make decisions if they become unable to. I was hoping you'd be willing to take that on. Of course, Uncle Warren, whatever you need. Perfect. Trevor thought he was maneuvering me into giving him control of my money. Instead, he was walking directly into my trap. Catherine called Thursday morning with her report. I listened in growing amazement as she detailed Trevor and Diane's financial situation. It was worse than I'd imagined. They're leveraged beyond belief, Catherine said. The house has been refinanced twice. They have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, plus a home equity line of credit that's maxed out. Credit card debt exceeding $150,000. How have they been making payments? They haven't. Not really. Trevor's business has been operating at a loss for 3 years. They've been using credit cards to pay other credit cards. Classic signs of financial desperation. Anything else? Diane took out a life insurance policy on you 8 months ago. $1 million with her listed as beneficiary. My blood turned to ice. How is that legal? She claimed insurable interest as your grandniece-in-law and caregiver. The insurance company probably assumed Trevor was the actual beneficiary and Diane was just handling the paperwork. A life insurance policy? They'd been planning my death for the better part of a year. There's one more thing. Warren, Trevor's been making regular payments to someone named Dr. Amanda Sterling, a geriatric psychiatrist. For what? I'm not sure yet, but the payments started 4 months ago. Small amounts, like consultation fees. Dr. Amanda Sterling. I made a note to ask Harrison about her. That afternoon, Trevor and Diane arrived at my penthouse with a briefcase full of paperwork for Golden Sunset Estates. They spread the documents across my dining room table like generals planning a battle. This is the admission contract, Diane explained, pointing to a thick stack of papers. And this is the financial disclosure form. It lists all your assets so they can calculate your monthly fees. It's very thorough, I observed, scanning the documents. They wanted access to everything. All my accounts, all my investments, complete financial transparency. The power of attorney paperwork is here, Trevor added, sliding another document toward me. It's pretty standard. Just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't. I read through the power of attorney document carefully. It was far more comprehensive than Trevor had indicated. With this signature, he'd have immediate access to my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the authority to make any financial decisions on my behalf. This seems quite broad, I said. Do I really need to give you this much authority? Uncle Warren, it's just a precaution, Trevor said. The facility requires it, and honestly, at your age, it's good to have someone younger handling the complicated financial stuff. At my age, there was that phrase again. What if I change my mind about Golden Sunset Estates? I asked. Can this be revoked? Trevor and Diane exchanged a quick glance. Well, technically yes, Diane said, but the facility has strict policies about residents who try to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. It's complicated. Of course it was. Once I signed these papers and moved to Golden Sunset Estates, they'd control my money and could make it very difficult for me to leave, especially if Dr. Amanda Sterling was standing by to evaluate my mental competency. I need to think about this overnight, I said, gathering the papers. It's a big decision. Trevor's face fell. Uncle Warren, remember, we need to submit everything by tomorrow if you want the unit. I understand. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. After they left, I called Harrison Webb. Harrison, what can you tell me about Dr. Amanda Sterling? Sterling? She's a geriatric psychiatrist. Specializes in competency evaluations for elderly patients. Why? My Grand-Nephew's been paying her for consultations. There was a long pause. Warren, Sterling has a reputation for being accommodating to families who are concerned about an elderly relative's judgment. Her evaluations tend to support whatever outcome the family is seeking. You mean she's willing to declare people incompetent for money? I couldn't say that officially, but I've seen several cases where families use Sterling's evaluations to gain control of an elderly person's assets. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Trevor and Diane weren't just after my money. They developed a comprehensive plan to take it, get me into Golden Sunset Estates under the guise of safety and care, use the power of attorney to access my accounts. If I resisted or tried to leave, have Dr. Sterling declare me mentally incompetent. It was actually quite clever. If I hadn't seen Diane poison the bourbon, I might have walked right into their trap. Harrison, I need you to prepare something for me, I said, and I need it ready by tomorrow morning. What kind of something? The kind that's going to teach my family a lesson they'll never forget. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of weather that made everything seem possible, perfect for what I had planned. Trevor and Diane arrived at 9 sharp, both dressed like they were attending a board meeting, which, in a way, they were. "Have you decided, Uncle Warren?" Trevor asked, settling into my living room with barely contained excitement. "I have. I pulled out the Golden Sunset Estates paperwork, now signed and notarized. I think you're right. It's time for me to start this new chapter." Diane's relief was visible. "Oh, Warren, I'm so glad. You're going to love it there." "I'm sure I will. And Trevor, I've signed the power of attorney papers as well." Trevor's hands actually trembled as he took the documents. "This is the right decision, Uncle Warren. You won't regret it." I smiled at him. "I'm sure I won't." We spent the next hour going over the financial paperwork. Diane had a laptop open, furiously typing as I provided account numbers and access codes. Every few minutes, she'd share a meaningful look with Trevor, like children who couldn't believe Christmas had come early. "There's just one more thing," I said when we'd finished. "I need to sign some additional paperwork with my attorney before the transfer is official. Something about tax implications for large financial transactions." "Of course," Trevor said. "Do you want us to drive you to his office?" "Actually, he's coming here. Harrison should arrive any moment." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. But it wasn't Harrison Wem standing in my hallway. It was Detective Sarah Chen from the LAPD, along with 2 colleagues I didn't recognize. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Detective Chen. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your residence earlier this week." Trevor stood up quickly. "What kind of incident?" "A suspected poisoning," Detective Chen said, her gaze moving between Trevor and Diane. "We understand there was a medical emergency here during a party." Diane's face had gone very pale. "That was my brother-in-law, Marcus. He had a reaction to his medication. The doctor said it wasn't serious." "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, that's not what the hospital reported." Detective Chen pulled out a notebook. "The toxicology results show Mr. Peterson ingested a concentrated amount of digitalis extract. That's not medication. It's a deadly poison." The silence in my living room was deafening. "We also had the remaining bourbon from that evening tested," the detective continued. "The bottle that was opened for the party contained the same digitalis extract. Someone deliberately poisoned that bourbon." Trevor was staring at Diane with an expression of dawning horror. "Diane, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything." Diane's voice was shrill with panic. "This is insane. Why would I poison my own brother-in-law?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Detective Chen said. "Especially since the bourbon glass with the highest concentration of poison was originally intended for Mr. Blackwood here." Diane looked like she might collapse. Trevor sank back into his chair, his face ashen. "There's something else," I said quietly. "Detective, show them the insurance policy." Detective Chen nodded and pulled out another document. "Mrs. Blackwood, we discovered you took out a $1 million life insurance policy on Mr. Blackwood 8 months ago. That gives you a clear financial motive for murder." "This is insane," Diane whispered. Warren, tell them this is insane. I looked at my grandnephew's wife, this woman who'd pretended to care about me while planning my death. I saw you put the poison in my bourbon glass, Diane. I switched our drinks deliberately. Trevor's head snapped up. You knew? You knew she was trying to poison you? I've known for days. I also know about your financial situation, about Dr. Sterling, about your plan to have me declared incompetent. The power of attorney papers slipped from Trevor's numb fingers. Uncle Warren, I didn't know about the poison. I swear to God, I didn't know she was going to try to kill you. But you knew about the rest of it, didn't you? The nursing home, the power of attorney, the plan to take my money? Trevor's silence was answer enough. Detective Chen stepped forward. Diane Blackwood, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As they handcuffed Diane, she turned to me with eyes full of rage. You think you're so clever, don't you? You have no idea what you've done to us. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I've done. After the police left with Diane, Trevor sat in my living room like a man in shock. He stared at the power of attorney papers scattered on the floor, occasionally running his hands through its hair. She said it was just about getting you somewhere safe, he said finally. She said you were starting to make poor decisions, that you needed protection. And the money? That was about protection too? Trevor's face crumpled. We're drowning in debt, Uncle Warren. The business is failing. We're behind on everything. Diane said if something happened to you naturally, we'd inherit enough to start over. But she never said anything about murder. I thought we were just planning ahead. Getting things in place for when you... He gestured helplessly. When I died of natural causes. How convenient that those natural causes needed a little help arriving. Trevor looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Uncle Warren. I never wanted to hurt you. I studied my grandnephew's face, looking for the truth beneath the remorse. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Diane had manipulated him into this situation. But I'd been in business too long to ignore red flags. Trevor, show me your phone. What? Your phone. Show me your text messages with Diane from the past week. Trevor hesitated, then reluctantly handed over his phone. I scrolled through his messages, my heart sinking with each exchange I read. Diane, did you talk to Warren about Golden Sunset? Trevor, yes, he's considering it. Diane, good. The sooner we get him moved, the better. He's been asking too many questions about our finances. Trevor, what if he changes his mind? Diane, he won't. Not after tomorrow night. What's tomorrow night? Diane, trust me. By Sunday, he'll be begging us to take care of him. I handed the phone back to Trevor. You knew, didn't you? Maybe not the specific method, but you knew Diane was planning something for the night of the party. Trevor's shoulders sagged. I thought she meant to scare you somehow, stage a break-in maybe, or some kind of accident that would make you realize you weren't safe living alone. You thought she was going to stage my attempted murder? Not murder, just something that would convince you to move to Golden Sunset Estates willingly. The casual way he said it chilled me to the bone. My own grandnephew had been comfortable with the idea of terrorizing me into compliance. Trevor, there's something else you need to know, I said. I had a private investigator look into your finances. His face went white. Everything. The debt, the failed business, the fact that you've been living beyond your means for years. I pulled out Catherine's report. The payments to Dr. Sterling? Uncle Warren, I can explain. Can you? Because according to this, you've been paying her to consult on my case for 4 months, months before you ever expressed any concern about my mental state. What exactly were you consulting her about, Trevor? Trevor buried his face in his hands. Diane said we needed a backup plan in case you refused to sign the power of attorney willingly. A backup plan. Sterling agreed to evaluate you and find signs of dementia or incompetency. Diane said it was just a precaution, in case you became difficult. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent from the beginning? Only if necessary. Only if you refuse to let us help you. Help me what, Trevor? Help me give you my money? The truth hung in the air between us. My grandnephew, the boy I'd mentored and loved, had been planning to destroy my independence and steal my life's work. There's one more thing, I said quietly. The papers you signed today, the power of attorney I gave you? Trevor looked up hopefully. They're fake. Harrison prepared them specially for this meeting. They give you power of attorney over a bank account that contains exactly $10. Trevor stared at me in shock. My real money is safely protected in trusts you can't touch. The will you're so worried about? It leaves you a modest annual income and nothing more. And if you're convicted of conspiracy in Diane's murder plot, even that goes away. Trevor's face crumpled. You've destroyed my life. No, Trevor, you destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process. 6 months later, I sat in my penthouse garden, watching the sun set over the city, thinking about family and forgiveness and the price of trust. Diane had been sentenced to 12 years for attempted murder. Trevor received 18 months for conspiracy, though his lawyer managed to argue it down from the original charges. The twins were living with Diane's parents in Phoenix, far from the wreckage of their parents' greed. Marcus had become an unexpected friend. We met for dinner twice a week now, two men bonded by the bizarre experience of surviving our own family's betrayal. He was writing a book about financial elder abuse, using our story as a case study. You know, Marcus said during our last dinner, I keep thinking about how close they came to getting away with it. They never had a chance, I replied. I've been dealing with people who wanted my money for 40 years. The only difference this time was that they shared my DNA. Marcus laughed. Do you ever regret how it ended, with both of them in prison? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret it? Trevor was my grandnephew, the child I'd helped raise after his parents died. But he was also a man who'd been willing to destroy my life for money. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally, but I don't regret protecting myself. The doorbell interrupted my reverie. Through the security monitor, I could see Harrison Webb standing in my hallway, holding a briefcase and looking unusually pleased with himself. Warren, I have good news, he said, settling into my living room. The insurance company has decided not to contest Diane's policy on your life. Since she was convicted of attempting to murder you, they're voiding the policy and returning all premiums paid. That's something, I suppose. There's more. Trevor's creditors are seizing all his assets to pay his debts. That includes the house you helped them buy. They're asking if you want to make an offer. I thought about Trevor and Diane's house, with its marble countertops and crystal chandeliers. All those beautiful things they'd wanted so desperately. No, I said, let someone else have it. Someone who can afford it honestly. Harrison nodded and pulled out another document. Final item, your trust restructuring is complete. Your money is now protected in perpetuity. No one can access it without your explicit written consent. And if anyone attempts to have you declared incompetent, the trust automatically transfers to charity. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. After Harrison left, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out onto my terrace. The city stretched out below me, thousands of lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. At 73, I'd learned that money brings out both the best and worst in people. Unfortunately, it had brought out the worst in my own family. But I'd also learned something else. I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for, smart enough to see through their plans, tough enough to stop them, and resilient enough to build a new life without them. My phone buzzed with a text message. Grandpa Warren, I got Berkeley admission to Stanford. Business school, just like you suggested. Can't wait to tell you all about it when I visit next month. Love, Emma. Emma, Trevor's daughter, now 18 and old enough to choose her own path. She'd written to me from Phoenix 6 months ago, horrified by what her parents had done, asking if we could still have a relationship. I'd said yes, of course. Emma was innocent in all this, another victim of her parents' greed. She deserved a chance to learn that family could mean something better than exploitation. I typed back, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to hear all about your plans." Maybe that was the real victory, not stopping Trevor and Diane's scheme, but ensuring that the next generation would have a chance to choose differently. Emma would grow up knowing that money was a tool, not a goal. That family meant support and love, not manipulation and greed. The city lights sparkled below me like stars, each one representing someone's dreams, struggles, and choices. I'd started this story talking about a failed poisoning at my retirement party, but really, it was about something much more important, the difference between being old and being powerless. I might be 73, but I was far from powerless, and anyone who tried to test that theory would learn, as Trevor and Diane had, that underestimating a sharp old businessman is a very expensive mistake. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and making sure the people who wronged you don't get to enjoy the fruits of their schemes. I'd done both, and I'd sleep just fine knowing it. After all, at my age, a good night's sleep is worth more than all the money in the world. The fact that I had both was just a bonus. The sun set completely, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new choices. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own home, with my own money, making my own decisions. And that, more than any amount in any bank account, was what true wealth looked like.